a school assignment in 8th grade to write about, I had to interview a war vet and then write about their experience. And my mom connected me with a friend of hers who was a Vietnam vet. He picked me up from school one day and we were driving in the car and he was dropping me off at home. And he turned to me and asked me on the highway, "Do you believe in God?" And I said, "Of course I believe in God." And he said, "Why?" And I started to give him my 13-year-old perspective, right? And he said, "Yeah, that sounds like a lot of things you were told, right?" And I sat back and said, maybe you're right, might be right. And he said, "Yeah, you shouldn't believe in things you can't prove to be true." And he said, "Yeah, because once you know it to be true, you don't have to believe it anymore." Just that short statement sent me on a quest, so to speak, for trying to understand the truth of things.
Welcome to another episode of Strong Place. I'm Ayo Johnson, Executive Director of Mental Health America, Central Carolinas. And do me a favor, please hit that like button, subscribe, and share this episode. We know it's going to be a good one, and it helps us get the word out about mental health. And today, I have joining me the president and CEO of the McColl Center in Charlotte, North Carolina, Mr. Asa Jackson. So, funny story, when I asked Jay to get you on the show for me, I did not know you were the president and CEO of McColl Center. Even though I saw you speak, I was just blown away about all the knowledge that you were dropping. And I think I had kind of blanked out when the moderator was introducing everybody that was on the panel that you were on. And so I get I'm thinking it was either Karen or Jesse. And I'm like, yeah, I'm waiting on Ace's bio, whatever. She was like, he's probably really busy, running the McColl Center. And I was like, no, I think he's just like an artist in residence or something. She's like, no, you might want to go back and read his signature again. And I was like, oh, you're right. He's probably really busy. Yeah, I crack myself up all the time.
I have been an artist in residence there as well too. So yeah, okay, not a bad guess.
Yeah, okay, yeah. You were dropping so much information, but it was just a funny story. I had to add it in there. So, but Asa is also the co-founder of the CAN Foundation. It's an arts nonprofit based in Virginia. Alongside his leadership roles, Asa is an accomplished multidisciplinary artist, hence why I thought he was an artist in residence, whose work has been exhibited nationally and internationally. He's an American artist and arts leader. He's based here in North Carolina. And as a multidisciplinary artist, his works explore the cross-section of textile from various countries, people, time periods, and personal histories. His works often are anthropological studies, the bios, people, representing the lives of a myriad of people, their collective and individual stories. By cutting and sewing fabrics together, Jackson metaphorically mixes cultures, time periods, people, and places into unified works of art. Not only is he a talented artist, though, he's also studied sociology at Boston University, and then he moved to New York in 2010, where he was featured in several exhibitions, including a solo one at the Samuel Owen Gallery in Greenwich, Connecticut, and then he opened a gallery called 670 Gallery in Virginia, leading the gallery as its director from 2014 to 2017. He has since been featured in numerous exhibitions, including more recently MoCA, it's MoCA, Arlington, Virginia, Hodges Taylor Gallery in Charlotte, North Carolina. All right, so MoCA, I'm sure, stands for Museum of Contemporary Art. Got it. All right. I got to sound knowledgeable here, people. In Virginia Beach, and the Harvey Began Center right here in Charlotte, North Carolina. He has a plethora of other things. I'm going to let you tell the rest of the story. Welcome to Strong Place, Asa Jackson, president and CEO, not just artist
Thanks for
of
having
the
me.
McColl Center.
I'm happy to be here. Happy to be here and talking with you.
Yeah.
And my apologies for such a long bio.
No. Listen, rep yourself. This is you have earned all of these things. You just became the CEO of the McColl Center in January of 2025. It also says that you've served on the Virginia Commission for the Arts. So I'm a native New Yorker, so I was very excited to see that you have done some work in New York. But yeah, just tell us a little bit more about yourself as an artist, and then also how did you get into executive leadership?
And thinking about the role that I play in the arts communities that I contribute to, I like to think of myself as a hat collector.
Okay.
So I'm definitely a full-time artist. But I think my art practice really informed me getting into arts admin and leadership. Just thinking about the gaps that existed in my environment and opportunities for artists, and figuring out early on in my career how to bridge some of those gaps for myself, but then getting with peers and thinking about bridging them for other artists in my community. One thing led to the other, which in 2014, sort of that momentum of thinking about those gaps led to me opening a gallery. And then a year later led to me founding a nonprofit to further help artists. And one thing leads to another. You end up taking different roles. And
Right, absolutely. I think of art as almost kind of like bringing someone's soul and spirit to life through different mediums, right? Canvas, textile, sculpture, it could be stone, so many different ways, right? Growing up in New York, never any shortage of graffiti artists. They brought theirs to life and their thoughts to life through spray paint, through a can. What is your personal mental health journey?
My personal mental health journey. This is going to sound interesting, right? I will say that there was a gentleman that I came in contact with when I was 13. I had a school assignment in 8th grade to write about. I had to interview a war vet and then write about their experience. And my mom connected me with a friend of hers who was a Vietnam vet. And this gentleman had a really interesting life experience. He was a 2-term Vietnam vet and also spent 30 years in prison for murder. Got out, turned his life around, started a fish farm, raised fish and sold fish. He was a very dynamic gentleman. And when I met him, we spent about 3 weeks really getting to know each other, spending a lot of time after school. And this one moment strikes me always because I feel like it was a defining moment in everything that happened to me after that. He picked me up from school one day, and we were driving in the car, and he was dropping me off at home. And he turned to me and asked me on the highway, "Do you believe in God?" Right? And it was an interesting thing to ask me in the moment that he asked me. And I never forget, we were passing this this lottery sign, and I just felt like, oh my gosh, where is this going? And so so I asked him, of course I believe in God. And I gave him all of my justification. And at the time, I was being raised in an Islamic household, Sunni Muslim, but, you know, in a Southern Christian, you know, family background. And I said, of course I believe in God. And he said, why? And I started to give him my 13-year-old perspective, right? And he said, yeah, that sounds like a lot of things you were told, right? And I sat back and said, maybe you're right, might be right. And he said, yeah, you shouldn't believe in things you can't prove to be true. And that made me think again. And he said, yeah, because once you know it to be true, you don't have to believe it anymore. And so just that short statement sent me on a quest, so to speak, for trying to understand the truth of things. And that was a challenging moment, I think, as a kid to hear that perspective, but also, what do I do with that? And so many years, I think that started a sort of a thirst for trying to get to the essence and core of what my beliefs were. and why I believe them, and slowly substituting them for a knowledge base that I could feel, safe in. So in terms of mental health, I think as a young person at the time, grappling with wanting to know my place in the world, both spiritually, as well as a young person of color, growing up in the South, and at the time that I was growing up, there was a lot of question, and I think that statement set me off down this place of like questioning and wanting to really do my due diligence in uncovering universal truths, but also personal truths. And so I know that was a long-winded answer, a way of coming about it, but I think that is how I initially, when I think back in my experience, that's my first experience with mental health, and really trying to put myself in a place within, the world and a perspective that I could feel good about.
Right. So 13 years old, you're asked if you believe it, kind of challenge that belief, and the foundation of that belief. Where do you feel like you've landed now as a grown man with that belief?
I'm hearing Carl Jung in my head as you answer that question, because I think he was asked a very similar question in the 1950s about if he believes in God. And he took a deep pause. And in the most eloquent way, he stated that, no, I don't believe in God. I know God to be real. And then he justified that answer, right? And so similarly, I feel like from then to now, I've had more than enough evidence in my journey to know the truth of things, from that perspective,
Right.
and to stand on that truth. Almost as much as we can stand on the knowledge base of what the sun does for our everyday experience.
Right.
Right. I don't have to believe in the sun's
Right.
power. I can see that. I can feel that. And if you have the eyes to see and hear, you can know the truth of those other things.
Absolutely. I'm fairly new to the mental health space. I'm not a clinician. Just been running MHA since January 2024. And it's my first work experience in mental health. I've been in nonprofit for better part of a quarter of a century. I started like when I was 10. So, and not being groomed like formally or educated in mental health, right? But lately, and I've had a steep learning curve in this 18 months. But what I have been hearing a lot lately is this connection between art and mental health.
Sure.
I get other organizations, arts organizations, it's like, oh, we need to do a collaboration, and I'm always like, okay, and I hear really good reasoning behind it. I'm curious, what do you feel like your connection is between art and mental health?
Okay, that's a great question. When I think about the function of art, right, I have to go back to time immemorial, right? Like I have to go back to cave paintings. I have to go back to little Venus figurines discovered from 27,000 years ago. And I have to come forward through early civilization and look at how art has been utilized by different societies throughout time, right? And what I find is that art has been a language at times. It has been an educator for certain societies. If you think about like hieroglyphics, for instance.
Right. I was just thinking about hieroglyphics when you said that.
We think about that as an art form, but really it doubled as a language, as an alphabet, as symbols that help people, not only guide them through the daily life, but also higher principles as well, right? So when I think about the role of an artist in societies that haven't been so modernized, when I think about tribal societies or third world countries even still, the artist and the priest and the medicine man traditionally is all the same role. You know, when you think about what a shaman is in a tribal society, right?
Right.
It's that figure within the group that can go into trance maybe, or go into a spiritual zone within themselves, go up into some realm, see and hear and witness things, and then come back down to earth and translate that, right? And those translations might be in the form of dance. They might be in the form of spoken word. They might be in the form of carved totems or scratches on a rock, right? But those are art forms that are helping the rest of those people within those societies be able to understand the cosmos, be able to understand their place within the cosmos, their place within their families, their place within their tribes, their place within their societies. And I think at best, art is still supposed to do that. I think artists have access to certain realms in inner worlds and maybe even outer worlds to be able to give us a perspective on what we're looking at, where we are within it. And so I think art and mental health has always been linked. I think art is, and that's maybe a little bit deep answer, but on a real simple answer, what would your life be like without being able to cut on the radio, right? When you're driving, or listen to that song, you know, when you're on edge, right?
Yes.
Or relax by cutting on that movie at night, or, you know, going to a performance. Like, what would life be like without those elements?
So empty.
Right?
Yeah.
It would be a real mental health crisis.
Right. No, really,
right?
for real.
And so when I think about the role of an artist today, so much of it is mixed with commercialism and consumerism and careers and industry. But really, if we get back down to the basics of what art is and how we live with it, art is really an essential to being a human living on earth in any society. Without it, again, I think, you know, I might argue we'd be in a mental health crisis.
Sometimes, like I said, I've been in nonprofit for so long, and most of the time I've worked in children and families, especially in marginalized communities, trying to advocate and raise money to help food insecurity, housing issues, any myriad of things. I used to run a YMCA, so we did health and fitness on that side. But I would always be jealous of the EDs and the grant writers in the arts community because it seems so easy to raise money around art. And then I talk to my fellow EDs that are running art organization. They look at me like, "Are you insane?" They just look at me like, "That's not right. It's not accurate."
Yeah.
But from the outside looking in, because with mental health, it's not easy to find a readily available person that wants to be the poster child for mental health, right? There's not, we cannot parade kids in front of donors and say, "Hey, look at all these children with the IEPs that we helped." That's just not a thing. But so when I was consulting full time, I used to have a business that supported other nonprofits. And one of the nonprofits that I supported was an arts foundation in New Jersey. It was started by the former governor. And the ED would go to so many different really cool events, all different types of arts events. There's arts festivals. There's, you know, the concerts. You go and watch the kids play the flute or the violin, or you go to an art show where the kids, you know, paintings are up. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so easy. Why did I end up on the struggle side of nonprofit, right? But then I also think about, and I've heard people say, you know, but then when things start getting cut, you know, and they cut things in school,
the arts are first.
They cut the arts first, not realizing that it's literally, like you said, like a lifeline to who we are as people. And then when you were talking, I started thinking about drawings. I used to be a school teacher also. I did a lot of jobs. And how we would be able to tell from a child's drawings, right? When they were, if what was going on at home, you could really tell whether or not something was going on internally, maybe if that child was being hurt or something was happening to them. And we would be able to turn that artwork into the school counselor and say, hey, I think you might want to look into something that's happening. And so, really, art being that way that we learned to communicate even as young children before we really could express ourselves verbally. A lot of times we were given crayons and a piece of paper or pencil and a piece of paper, even to keep kids busy. And so, yeah, we've actually, we don't think about it, but we've literally learned to communicate through art since we were young.
Yeah. I think there's this motion, not to cut you off, right? But
Right.
there's this motion that I think we tend to forget, right? Which what I'm illustrating right now is drawing the idea.
Yes.
Like if you have thoughts here, right? To get out of the rumination of thinking and sometimes going in circles, right? A really basic physiological exercise that we take for granted is writing down or drawing the idea, right? Which is the starting point for any design work, any artwork, right? But is also the starting point for creating space between yourself and your thoughts. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so, you know, and I'll give credit to that draw the idea that comes out of the work of Chouinard Art School, which was a historic school in Los Angeles that existed from the 1920s to the 1970s. But their principle was really helping students to understand how to take something here and put it here, right? To start creating that distance. But there was something that you were saying in your statement a second ago about the challenges of a arts ED versus other nonprofits. And I wanted to go back to that for a second.
Oh, don't get me. Like,
because, you know,
right.
I think from a civic standpoint, when you think about what a community needs, right, in order to be healthy, in order to be economically viable, in order to be a real community that has common unity and is not just tied together by geography, right? Great communities are thinking about all the elements, all of the industries that it takes to be cohesive there, to coincide. And so often, I think the arts is left out of the forefront of that conversation. When you think about arts as an industry, I find that quite often, if people aren't directly involved in it, the knowledge base of it is very minimal.
It's very limited.
Right? And then when you're thinking about it from like a civic leadership standpoint, there's always a conversation of how much of our tax dollars should go towards creativity or the arts, right? And usually there's I think the challenge, I would say, from a nonprofit standpoint is that the arts is usually seen as something that needs to be supported and not invested in, right? So when you think about support,
That's a good way of putting it.
right? Like support is something that you might
optional.
throw a couple dollars at and forget about it,
Right.
right? There's no expectation of real return. There's no even attachment to what might happen to those dollars, right? I think, you know, for lack of a better example, you know, and maybe this is something that we should address later, but I think that is how so often we deal with the homeless population of like, okay, if I pass you and it doesn't make me go too far out of my way and I happen to have some change or a dollar, I will give it to you, right? But for me to pull out, for me to go out of my way and then think about pulling out a little bit more, then I have to be attached to it in some way, right? So now I'm invested, right?
Right.
And in the same way, I you know, on a macro scale, I think the arts sometimes within communities is looked at in that model of like, if we have it, you know, we don't mind to give it.
If we have extra,
Right.
we throw you some money.
But it's not a part of the actual conversation in the forefront.
Interesting.
But I think back to a moment when the arts was at the very forefront of American politics. In the 1930s and 40s and 50s, you had this program called the WPA, right, which was where this historic percentage for the arts actually comes from, right? It was at the time when FDR was putting in the New Deal, right? A piece of the New Deal, well, and of course, to go back to the New Deal, I would liken that to like the pandemic PPP.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
So the New Deal was a time almost 100 years ago, or I guess 90 years ago, where the government saw a need to bail out certain industries.
Right.
Right? And to make sure that Americans were staying working. Right?
Banks, yes.
And if it weren't for an artist named George Biddle being friends with FDR and Eleanor Roosevelt at the time and being invited to dinners in the White House, there might not have been anybody advocating for the cultural workers, right? And so in one critical night, he said, hey, you know, what you guys are doing with the New Deal is great, but what about all the artists? We're the ones creating the cultural landscape, the backdrop. We're the ones creating the programs for the kids and the things to entertain the people, especially in the Great Depression, right? And the president and his wife said, hey, maybe you're right. We need to do something about this. So they came up with this WPA, Workmen's Progress Act, I believe. And underneath of it, there was a Federal Art Project #1. And what they did was basically turn cultural workers into, what is the tagline? During the pandemic, we heard it all the time. Like the people who were working on the front lines, the necessity.
Oh,
you know what I'm trying to say.
The first responders,
yes. And necessary industry.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So they basically turned artists into that, and for about 10 years straight, they were paying artists checks to just be artists, and over 10,000 American artists went through this program.
Wow.
And it was during this period that the center of the art world shifted from Paris, France, to New York City. And we had already been paying all of our artists to be artists, so we were primed and ready.
Right.
And so, yeah, I just think that
outliers.
We've had so many examples in society when the arts can move to the forefront of political conversation, what it can do for countries and for legacies. I think this is a critical moment right now to relook at that.
You made a really good point about we support the arts, but not so much invest in the arts. And also I actually got this visual of like, what would life be like if we didn't have, art or artists, and it would just be so boring and bland and void of just the simple things that bring us peace and solace. Right. Absolutely.
I've heard this statement, the earth without art would just be
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's really good. Only artists would think of that though, right? Only artists. There was another thing that you were talking about when you said people don't really understand, and I was like, do I ask them this? Like, why is art so expensive? So lately, where was that? Oh, it was you that said something about people who have home goods or art on our walls, and there was so many people in that audience. It was like, ouch, you know what I mean? But and I just cracked up because I was thinking how I have evolved in the last few years. I don't even know how, but literally I've evolved from, I don't want this like retail stuff on my walls. And now I go to look for more like custom pieces, or whether or not I live in University City, I can walk right over the boardwalk.
Sure.
And I took my team for a staff retreat. We did a 2-day staff retreat this year. And the first day, which was the fun day, we went to City Art Room and we did like a painting thing together. It was like a round robin. And for one, most of my staff didn't even know it was there. but I find myself when I go into different spaces and I see art for sale, I want to buy it because I want my walls to reflect not the cookie cutterness of the art that you can buy for $39.99 in Home Goods or the other place, the At Home or things like
Sure,
that, right?
sure.
And so I find myself wanting to get more, just one-off pieces,
Originals,
one-of-a-kind
yeah.
things.
Mhm.
And but it's so expensive, right?
Right.
And I think that more people would love to lean into that. So just give us a little economics,
Absolutely.
lesson on why is art so expensive?
Absolutely, right. So let's put time into that conversation, and then let's take art out of the conversation for a minute, right?
Okay.
If you put time on any object, it becomes more and more important,
Right, because we have so limited,
right?
it's limited time, right?
So like
Can't get it back.
So if you put time on, and that's relative. So let's put a longer amount of time, right, on any object. So we could take an iPhone, for instance. If you put 5 years on that iPhone, it becomes outdated, right? If you put 100 years on that iPhone, it becomes an antique relic
Right.
of a period,
Right.
right? And so time actually gives context to an object in which you're dealing with, right? But in the sense of fine art, visual art, even music, I think, and even maybe to a degree theater, but definitely fine art and visual art, there's a thing that is an indicator of value, which is called provenance. And provenance, right, by definition, it exists outside of the art world, but in the art world, provenance really is an indicator of the who, what, when, where, how, and why that goes behind a work of art or even an organization or a place, right? It's something's origin story. So the provenance would be who made it, when was it made, why was it made, how was it made, right? But then what time period did it come from? What school of art was it associated with? Where did the artists go to school? Where have they shown their work? What institutions are associated? What other artists are associated? Who else owns their work, right? And so all of these things are indications. Like the more context you start to put going backwards, the more who, what, when, where, how, and why you attach, then you start to see the cultural value, the historic value, right?
Right.
Maybe the spiritual value, all these other values that then become attached to an object. And then to boot, I think about this constantly within my life, right? I'm only able to make a certain finite amount of objects, and I'm infusing my soul, my spirit into that work. So not only is it a piece of me that is actually being left behind, it's a relic of a time period, but it's also perspective that needs to be thought about, right? So when you add all of those elements to an object, but then all of those points of context, they start to then give you a value. And that's before we even get to the price.
Right.
Right?
Right.
A value of how do you value something, right? So now it's a conversation of price versus value, right? You can buy a $5 value meal, eat it up, and it's done, right? You can buy a $5 drink, $5 cup of coffee. You drink it up, and it's gone, right?
Right.
You could go to a thrift store and buy a ring for $5 and wear it every day for the rest of your life, and then pass it to your daughter, who then passes it to your granddaughter, who then passes it to your great-granddaughter. So price and value is not the same thing, right? How we value things can be an indicator of price, but it's not necessarily equivalent.
Right.
And so when I think about artwork, you have to deal, you're dealing with an object that a human created, which has intrinsic value. But then when you overlay that with time and other objects and the fact that banks recognize art as assets when it gets a certain name, and all these other factors, right? Influence. Then we're looking at something completely different. And even the question reminds me of a conversation that I had maybe 10 years ago with a colleague, where he was challenging me on the thought of art being a commodity, right? and he was saying that there's no way that art is a commodity, and I was trying to push back on that, saying that art is a commodity. And look at its effects on the economy. So, to me, one of the greatest examples of that is the Mona Lisa, right? It's a painting that was created, just over 500 years ago, and when I think about the fact that I said the Mona Lisa, and everybody in this studio and everybody who's listening to this podcast knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Yes.
And has an image in their mind.
Right.
Right. As soon as I say the word, right? There's a reason for that. And then you have to consider how many hands that one object has passed through for 500 years to keep it safe and to keep it intact. Right. And then of each of those stewards of the work, they had to learn from the previous steward its importance, how to take care of it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Who made it, when it was made, how it was made. And that had to be passed hand to hand to hand until it found itself into a museum or institution, right? And then it took on a new life, right? And so you fast forward to 2025, how many millions of people are flying to France every year to see the Mona Lisa? How is that affecting airfare? How is that affecting hotel accommodations? How is that affecting restaurant?
Right.
How is that affecting taxis? How is that affecting the tickets at the actual museum? How is that then affecting that image that can be reproduced on stickers, on magnets, postcards, all the things, everything. Right? T-shirts. And so when you're thinking about the price of a work of art, there's a lot that goes into it, right? But I think the starting place is provenance. It's the who, what, when, where, how, and why, because without answering those questions, you don't even know what you're looking at, Yeah. Very interesting perspective. It's deep. It's deep.
It is deep.
We can have a whole podcast on that.
No, it is deep. I have a lot of respect for our artists. A young lady I used to mentor got into art. She started actually I don't know when she actually started drawing, but she she's a classically trained pastry chef.
Okay.
And made beautiful cakes, very ornate. And then one day, just I keep in touch with her on social media, and I see her. She's putting art and everything out, and so I've started to buy some of her things just because I understand like that process of which she puts her like soul into those pieces. So there's so many ways I think in which we can connect art to mental health, but I think that you encapsulated it perfectly about this. And the one thing I'm going to say, as a visual learner, I think there's also the other direction, right? And so that motion of mind to paper, right, or thought or to paper, but then also the other way around in which we can absorb so many things that we need in life. So I tell my staff all the time, like they try to tell me something. I'm like, okay, well, I'm visual. Let me see what we're talking about. Send me an email. Let me see it in writing. Or, I have a friend who's also trained to do a graphic artistry. Like she'll basically translate a meeting notes. She'll sit there and she'll listen to meetings. And she draws it out in these huge graphic designs. And it really helps those of us in a room that learn visually.
Yep.
I'm a visual learner, so I think that's really important. So many different directions we could have gone in this conversation, but I appreciate like all of the knowledge and the passion which you bring your craft.
No, I appreciate that. And I would love to, just make a statement on that too, because I think art is something that everybody deals with naturally. I think everybody has, everybody is a creator, whether you're making breakfast or you're making a work of art, right? It's the process of creation. And I think when you put art into the industry, then you start having to deal with price and this and that and this and that. But
Right.
if you take the industry out of it,
Right.
right, and just deal with the function of it, I think that's the first way to deal with it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Absolutely.
And so, yeah. Anyway.
So before we wrap up, tell us like what's going on at the McColl Center and what's coming, and what some of the initiatives you're working on.
Absolutely. So joining the McColl Center this past January has been very transformative for my personal journey, but I also think transformative for the organization, because for the first time, there is an artist at the helm in leadership that is informing leadership from the perspective of an artist. And before coming on board as a CEO of McColl, I actually had the opportunity of being a resident artist there. And so I've had the residency experience, and looking at my experience and looking and talking with an uncountable amount of artists about their experiences and residencies.
Right.
I'm really excited for this year, because McColl Center is in its 25th year. So it's a great moment to sort of look back and to take the best of what has been done and the legacy, and thinking about how we can solidify that, but also envision a future. And I think, being the best stewards that we can possibly be to the artists that we're bringing from around the world into Charlotte on a year in, year out, month in, month out basis, but also being the best stewards we can be for the Charlotte community, to make sure that the value is going both ways. So, I'm super excited for the work. We have this year brought just over 5 artists from countries all around. Have brought a number of artists from all types of states. But even in our application pool, there's 400 plus artists from maybe 5 or 6 different continents applying to us, like year in and year out.
Wow.
And so thinking about the osmosis of culture, the osmosis of thinking that presents as an opportunity for Charlotte is just amazing. And so I'm just looking forward to creating more of a porous membrane for the culture to come in and go out of, our little piece of Charlotte.
Wow. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for joining me on Strong Place. Let the audience know where they can find out either more about you as an artist, where they can find you on social media, and also the McColl Center.
Absolutely. So you can find me personally on Instagram at Asa Jackson Art, on my website, asajackson.com. And you can learn more about McColl Center at mccallcenter.org, or follow us on Instagram at McColl Center, and also the Contemporary Arts Network, the organization that I help to run in Virginia. You can find more about that at thecontemporaryartsnetwork.org, or on Instagram at Contemporary Arts Network. Thanks for having me, Ayo. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you, Asa, for joining us. And thank you for joining me for another episode of Strong Place. I'm Ayo Johnson, Executive Director, Mental Health America. Please don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Until next time.